Good evening. As chair of the Exeter Heritage Commission, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. On February 10th, 2021, public notice of this meeting was posted on the town website and on the bulletin board in the town offices at 10 Front Street. As provided in that notice, the public may access this meeting online and via telephone. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Let's start the meeting by roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state whether there's anyone else in the room with you and the relationship of that person. This is required under the right to know law. I am John Merkel, chair, and there's no one with me. Maura?
I'm Maura Fay, treasurer, and no one else in the room with me.
John?
John Gruder. I am alone in my home office.
Julie?
Hello, good evening. I'm Julie Gilman, the select board rep for the Heritage Commission, and I am in my office alone. My husband is wandering around.
Okay.
John, I didn't get to say my part. Hopefully, the only words I think I'll say tonight, but I'm Bill Campbell. I'm in my room alone.
Okay. I didn't realize we had to move over to see everybody. Okay. All right. Let's get started. Thank you for attending, and I hope we can answer some questions tonight for the public. Do we want to put up the screen?
Yes.
You're muted, Mara.
Oh, sorry, Dan. Yes. I think we're good to go ahead and do the screen share.
You should be seeing it now. Just let me know when to change slides.
Okay. Do we have attendees, Dan?
Yes.
Good. All right. The purpose of this meeting is to familiarize the public and seek volunteers to help with establishment of the neighborhood heritage area. In and around the streets, Park Street, Cass Street, Walnut, etc. And this is kind of like a revision of the first meeting that we had. Some of you will probably recognize the slides, others will not. They've been modified to help us go through them quicker so that we can allow more time for questions. And I think for opening purposes, Julie, would you like to begin? Hold on.
You're muted. There.
Next slide.
Julie, you're still muted.
You're muted, Julie.
It turned off for a second, but then it went right back on.
Okay. This is just a little bit about the Exeter Heritage Commission. It was established in 2006, and it means and manages to recognize and protect historical and cultural resources in the town of Exeter. There's a website there that you can barely see on this slide, but I think it also appears on the notice that you received in the mail. Next slide.
Okay, now I can talk. The Heritage Commission does for historical resources what a conservation commission does for natural resources. We advise and assist, including proposed demolitions. We conduct inventories of Exeter's history. You might hear us talk about what's called an area survey or a historical survey. We put out publications of the surveys that we do and try to educate the public on what is the heritage of Exeter and participate with other boards and commissions to help them with the decisions of structures that or areas that involve our heritage and how the town grew over time. And we serve as a resource for anything new coming along, just to talk about what was there and what's going to be there, and how can the two things join together in an appropriate fashion. Next slide. Okay, what is considered a historic resource and why? If you have read the Park Street Area Survey that's on the Heritage Commission's website, you will see that it's titled Historic District Survey, and that's not the purpose of this. It's what it's needed to be called by the state and federal government that gave us the grant to do the things. So what's included in it is what is a historic resource and why is it called that? And what's included is pretty much anything that involves Europeans or pre-Europeans coming to Exeter. It's buildings, parks, landscapes, any place over 50 years old. I know that sounds young, but that's the Secretary of the Interior standard now, is that anything over 50 years old is now considered a resource to the heritage or historic atmosphere of your town. It's influential to both the town, the state, and the federal government, in that if you'll notice, say, the Independence Museum is actually a national landmark. Downtown Historic District is a nationally recognized historic district, as is the Front Street Historic District. We have several properties in town that have had that kind of distinction, and they are the resources to our community. Our historic resources to our community that identify who we are and where we've been and where we're going. Next. John, do you want to go or you want me to keep going?
If you don't mind, I would prefer you or Maura to step in,
No, I'll take this one too.
Okay.
So the definition of what is heritage and why we keep using the word and how it's different from just plain historic is that it notes it's noting or relating to a product, place, entity that evokes a nostalgic sense of tradition or history. If you look at our Franklin Street Area Survey, you might not, and you may remember the destruction of the little white garage that was on the corner of Franklin Street. A lot of people thought it was just an eyesore, but it actually had it was an historical resource to the growth of the town, being the first auto dealership and repair garage in 1913. And then the rest of the survey showed not necessarily outstanding pieces of architecture, but the tradition of that area being settled by new immigrants. So new immigrants would come in, they'd work at the mills, earn enough money to buy a piece of property in another place in town, and then a new group of immigrants would come in. So it showed how Exeter grew from the change over time of new groups of people moving into town. And our goal is to preserve and protect that kind of nostalgia and the character of the town, and different parts of town, which are in different neighborhoods, have an aspect that is original to them and not necessarily the same as every other place. We did are looking at this project, the Park Cast Forest Oak Street, or generically called the Park Street Neighborhood Heritage Area, because it's an area of town that shows how we've developed over time with infill architecture, meaning the lots used to be big, but now they're smaller, so there are more houses, it's more compact. There are periods of architecture that are present, and it's a long range of periods, and that shows how the town grew. We started with a few and wide spaces, and then we grew to subdivide and add in closer and closer. So it became a very tight neighborhood, but with many different periods of architecture, many different periods of settlement that is worth preserving, or worth preserving the atmosphere without making it a full-blown historic district that we already have 3 of, and you could make the whole town a historic district at this point, but we don't want to go down that road and at this point with this area.
Next slide. This indicates the area of the Park Cass Street historic area, neighborhood area. You can see it includes Forest Street, Salem, part of Salem Street, Walnut Street, Locusts, Park Street and Cass Street, Green Street, part of Main Street, excuse me, even part of Epping Park, that's down by the park that's considered Epping Road. And I think there's almost 200 properties in this area, if I'm not mistaken. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes.
We'll be coming back to this as we move forward with questions and answers. But if you've had a chance to look at the actual survey that was prepared, each and every one of these buildings is identified individually, and there's comments about it and whether and the reason this area has been limited to these pieces is because the fact that as Julie had said, over time the town has developed in a different, and this section of town is quite unique in that it is very dense, and most of us know our neighbors pretty well because of the proximities of things. And it's experienced, Park Street, I believe, goes back into the 1600s. And the railroad came through in the 1840s, I believe. So there's been a lot that has developed here on both sides of that. Anyway, next slide, please.
And I just say that there are lots of little fun facts about that area that are in the survey that's on our website. You'll see that street names changed, like Park Street used to end and became Land's End because the timbermen were cutting down the mast trees for the king, and they would float them down the river, so they needed a straight path to get to the river, and that's how we got Main Street and Park Street to carry those big things as straight as possible. So I urge you to read the survey just to make yourselves familiar with what's around you. It's an awful lot of fun if you like history.
John, do you want me to start with this one?
Please, Tamara.
Sure. So the proposal that we are kind of starting to talk about at this point is to pull together what's now being called a neighborhood heritage area. And what that would require would be that a group of people would volunteer to become sort of the strategic planning committee, if you will. It would be neighborhood residents primarily, hopefully. It could be other interested parties from town. And those folks would get together, they would review the document that is provided to us by the Division of Historic Resources, and would start drafting a proposal about what the neighborhood heritage area would entail, and what types of decision-making powers they might have or restrictions that they might recommend. And then that recommendation would go to the planning board, and the planning board would actually be the deciding body who would say yes or no to establishing this heritage area. And at that point, if the planning board were to say yes, they would appoint an official advisory panel for this neighborhood heritage area. And that would be a panel that would sort of be a subset of the planning board, I guess you could call it. It wouldn't have to have planning board members on it. I think in the guidance document, it says the advisory panel can be between 3 and 7 members with up to 3 alternates. So, that would be something that the planning board could decide what makes sense in terms of the number of people and how many people are interested in being involved. And what that advisory group would do would be to ultimately determine, what types of recommendations they would make around how to maintain the heritage of the area. Some of the things that we've talked about as the Heritage Commission would be potentially some decision-making power around demolition. One of the major challenges to maintaining the heritage of this neighborhood is that it's okay to demolish a building, even though it's over 50 years old, and we have to do a demolition review. If someone were to want to tear down a house and just rebuild a house in its place, that's perfectly acceptable. And in fact has happened in several places in this neighborhood. So one of the things that we're hoping to do is to provide some additional protections, especially to some of the older homes in this neighborhood, which are truly some of the oldest houses in this town that still exist. And at that point, what the advisory board could do would be to work with applicants. So let's say the homeowner wanted to make some alterations to their property. Let's say they wanted to, knock down a rear wing or something like that. It would be, the advisory group could then work with them to say, sure, that would be fine. Whatever gets rebuilt, needs to be done in the same sort of style. It needs to, kind of aesthetically look like it belongs, essentially. And it wouldn't be to say that anybody has to use a certain kind of window for their home or anybody has to have a certain kind of siding or anything like that. It would be more to protect and preserve the historic homes in this neighborhood from demolition and from being so altered that they're sort of unrecognizable. Anything else to add? Okay, next slide. So the question was asked at our last presentation about this, about kind of opting in or out. And the way this would work is the boundaries of the heritage area would be determined by that advisory committee. They would probably work from the framework of the historic district survey that was done. Some of those edges of the boundaries can be tweaked to add a home here, to remove a home there. The goal would be to preserve and protect as much of that neighborhood as possible. And once the neighborhood boundaries are set, then opting in, opting out time is kind of over. So that sort of preliminary stage in the first, I don't know, however long that takes, would be the time when homeowners could speak to the advisory committee, could say, I'd really like this property to be included, or I think it should be excluded because of this. And then they would move forward from there. All right, next slide. So we've touched a little bit on why a move like this is important. I think, as Julie was talking about, this is a really unique section of town. It does have some of the oldest homes from some of the earliest days of European settlement. And it also has an interesting pattern of development where after the railroad came through, this infill development happened in sort of the oak walnut forest area where you see lots of houses built in the 1840s through the 1870s with lots of differing architectural styles, but also a similar feel to them. They're relatively modest in size. The properties, the yards aren't huge. It doesn't feel like a more modern housing development. And it also doesn't feel like, some of the sort of 1950s and 60s era developments where it looks sort of suburban. I think of like the West Side Drive neighborhood, which is this very sort of unique and distinctive feel of its own. This has a very different feel, and it's something that we are hoping to be able to preserve so that future generations of people who live in Exeter can enjoy this town's history and heritage. So what it also does is it would prevent out of scale incompatible development. It would mean that, you know, if houses were to be altered, or if someone were to propose a major change to kind of a home's footprint, that would be something that the advisory group could discuss so as to make it the least intrusive to the rest of the neighborhood and help it to sort of blend in well. And I think one of the other important things is that it holds in balance affordable housing. You know, a lot of the homes in this neighborhood are on the smaller, more modest size. And these are the homes that, you know, families may be able to start out in as they're first looking to purchase a home in Exeter. And, you know, we know that affordable housing is a real challenge for, you know, not only Exeter, but for all of Southern New Hampshire and a lot of areas. So the idea that we can create an area of town where it is easier for families to afford to live, especially younger families or first-time homeowners. It helps to keep the diversity of the demographics of our town, which I think is a nice thing.
One of the other things that you can add to that, and it recently came up in a conversation of a bill at the State House, is that protecting the built environment that you already have is also a sustainable way to treat your town, because the materials that those older houses were built with are much more thermally protective, and you don't have to get, you know, new products in that aren't going to last as long. It's, you know, using what exists is better than creating all new in such a neighborhood as this.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's definitely an ecological aspect to this. All right, I think we're ready for the next slide, please. Julie, do you want to do this one, or should I keep going? Or John?
This one, I'll take this one. We showed you the map of the boundaries of the area. We talked about the opt-in, opt-out aspect, where the advisory committee could actually expand or contract the area that we've proposed from our survey. And one of the biggest questions we got was, how is this different from an historic district? Historic districts, or actually, did you already do that? I'm on, yeah. Sorry, I went beyond my slide. There is, why can't the existing towns boards and committees provide these protections? Because there is no state law that provides for any of our existing boards to actually do this kind of thing. Our boards are regulatory. The zoning board, the planning board, and the historic district commission have rules that need to be followed. What we want to have accomplished by a heritage area is a more resident-run, in agreement without all the paperwork and you know, regulations that come with trying to build something new or something new, or, you know, just a change on your place that might fall within zoning restrictions or be big enough that a planning board has to do a site design evaluation, or is located in one of our 3 historic districts where things that are substantial changes need to be reviewed by the HDC to explain how it is appropriate for the area that it's put in. The heritage area is going to be as restrictive or as loose as the advisory committee and the decides, and the planning board approves. If the planning board says, yeah, you know, do these things, we might decide to keep things strict. We might decide to only consider demolition or additions. That's going to be up to that advisory committee. In the end, it will be up to the planning board to accept that is what this sort of overlay of that area would comprise. in what they're reviewing. So it's really more about maintaining the neighborhood feel by the people that live there. Not having more self-control, I think, is what we're looking at, as opposed to it's sort of like home rule versus Dillon's rules, like the state is, where those who are living in the homes in this area can say this is what we want to see, as opposed to the town saying this is what you will see or what you can see. And I think Maura talked a little bit about it too, being it's not regulatory. We're not going to say, as a town, we don't have to vote on it and say, yes, this area will be a neighborhood. It's just the planning board that will make that determination and have the advisory committee's recommendations to addressing their own guidelines, as opposed to the whole town voting on it.
Any questions here, or next slide?
I think we've pretty much covered this. The boundaries of the area, as we said, determined by the advisory committee. And the fact that this is very, very different from a historic district. And it's really about maintaining the neighborhood feel. It's less about this is how big your trim needs to be, this is the type of siding you need to use. And it's more about kind of understanding the neighborhood as a whole and saying that, there's a range of architectural styles that exist here that make sense here. And we're trying to maintain that versus any specific, strict regulations about window materials, let's say. And again, that will be down to the advisory board. So the potential for what the advisory board can do is pretty broad, but it is limited in that it truly cannot get to be as restrictive as a historic district. So it really will be a sort of broader general overview rather than, property by property. This is what it has to look like. Next slide, unless anybody else has anything there. The regulations will be drafted by that advisory committee. They'll be presented to the planning board for approval. And this, whoever is interested in being involved in this is welcome to do so. I think this would be a great time for folks to be thinking about whether this is something you're interested in being involved in, whether you have a little bit of time to volunteer to start this advisory committee. And we can talk about whether that's something the neighborhood wants to do. And I think we're good for the next slide. So I feel like this came up a little bit at our last conversation. There isn't any specific tax advantage for being within the boundaries. There's no specific tax disadvantage. I think the main advantage is potentially that, property values get preserved in the way that they are because of living in a neighborhood such as this. I think part of what makes these homes so appealing to a lot of people and why they tend to sell very quickly when they do go on the market is that people like living in a tight-knit neighborhood close to town like this. It's a walkable town. This is a spot that you can stroll down to Swayze from and go get an ice cream. And so this is something that as a community, I think it's important for us to preserve. So though there isn't a specific tax advantage, there potentially obviously could be an advantage to property value preservation as the neighborhood gets to stay an appealing one to live in. Anything else on that one? I think we're good there. John, do you want to do this one?
Sure. You're looking at two colors prints here. The yellow one is our issues that we've already engaged or are still engaged with. And the ones in white are ones that are yet to be fulfilled. But this is basically the process of putting together this neighborhood heritage area. And what we tried to do months ago was engage the property owners. We have not presented anything to the planning board yet because we really feel it needs to be it needs to be generated by members of the area, and that hasn't been established yet. We then develop a preliminary neighborhood plan. This is something that the Heritage Commission will work with that committee, and it has not been developed yet either, but it's been talked about and strategized. The boundaries, well, the boundary we're working with right now were the ones that were done on the original survey that was prepared in 2019. They seem to make sense. What is a little confusing for people is our heritage historic districts right now are based on street appearances. They only are enforced 200 feet back from the street. This particular area here is a entire neighborhood, and it's looked upon in a way that's different than just differently than you would even look at the historic district. These are not buildings made to be looked at individually. They're put on places where there are non-conforming uses. The vast majority of them are non-conforming uses, either in setbacks or some way, one way or another. But at any rate, the planning board will be looking for a plan at some point for this neighborhood heritage area. And we are looking tonight for people to help, well, first determine that there's interest in doing this, and then people that are willing to help put it together. And then once we can get these first 3 or 4 items executed, we can then approach the planning board with a preliminary plan and follow it through to the point where it eventually becomes put to the town vote. And then if approved, the planning board will create a permanent neighborhood advisory committee that will put the final touches on everything together. Does that seem like what this means?
I think so. I think that we really need to stress that we're at the beginning stages of this. And so we're looking really to engage, as the Heritage Commission, to engage neighbors and interested parties in doing this kind of exercise, because we want the input from people that live there, and that isn't what typically happens with zoning changes or historic district changes. You get one shot. Do you want this or not? And this is a little bit different, where we can work together to come up with what are design guidelines, or just this is why we like this place. So please don't put something big next to it. It can be very simple or as detailed as you want it to be. But we need people that live there to tell us what they think needs to be protected, preserved, enhanced. And then once we feel complete with that, and once we know all the players are happy and have found, or as close to happy as we can all be, then we go to the planning board, and it would be all of the people that have helped build this that would go to the planning board together to really make the case for why this is an important function for the town to have, and in this particular place. So those first 4 or first 3 steps are very important. We'd like to get started as soon as we have interested people, and then talk to, I think John Gruder is our planning board representative, and he can introduce it a little bit to the planning board before we start making our way through to even getting there. So that's why we have these different representatives from different boards, is so we can crosstalk and keep each other informed on things. So I guess I'm saying all of that because once you see the word planning board, you might start getting nervous about what the planning board is going to be restrictive or something like that. But really what we're trying to kind of master plan here is driven by the neighborhood and not by either the whole town or just the planning board. Does that make anything clearer? Or am I talking too much?
No, that's fine.
That's good.
The next slide, please. Okay, at this point, we would like to address questions and comments. You're going to be recognized if you want to be, and we just ask that you state your name and your street address. Dan, are you with us?
I am. I just accidentally closed the PowerPoint. I can bring it back up in a moment if you would like. In the meantime, we do have a couple hands.
Okay.
All right. Dan, are you the one who gets to go through the hands?
Yep. Ann Sermon is currently on mute.
Okay. Ann, go ahead.
Yes, hi. My name is Ann Sermon. I'm over at 14 Cullen Way, and I'm not in the neighborhood, but I'm just interested in the whole presentation. And I appreciate the fact that a member of the neighborhood invited me to the meeting. And this has been a great presentation. And my question may be way down the road, but in terms of, I'm assuming it passes and we're already at the stage where it exists. And again, I realize I'm going way ahead. Is it advisory only? In other words, you start the slideshow with the whole notion that it is similar to a conservation commission, which advises to the planning board today. So I guess I'm looking at the level of authority you would have, because I think the idea of this is excellent. It's just a question of when you get to sort of the final stage, it's an advisory, it's something you would say, okay, here is something where in this neighborhood something's going on with a home, and then you advise to the planning board, but they still have the final say. Am I right? And again, I realize I'm way down the road. You have a lot to do before you get there, but I've seen similar types of things done in other states where they have demolition committees as kind of a different type of thing, or anti-demolition committees. That's not what this is, I realize. But I just wanted to get a sense of what the authority level would be, because you do all this work, and then if all of a sudden it doesn't, basically the planning board does have final say, am I right? And I apologize for being long-winded.
I think, Julie, you probably have the best answer to that, right?
Well, thank you for the question. And really, what we're trying to do with this tool that the state has developed is to engage more of the public with their connection to the town by their little piece of it, or more broadly. But the planning board has only certain things that they can have regulations over. Some of the things that may happen on a piece of property in this area would never be seen by the planning board, but only maybe the planning department. So if the advisory committee that's established by the planning board comes up with I don't want to use the word rules, because that's a misconception of what we're trying to do here. But when the
guidelines,
thank you, that's a good word. The guidelines of what basically is what makes this neighborhood a special place, and this is how that we'd like to keep it that way. And for then the planning board will come in and accept the opinions basically of that advisory committee. So when something happens in that area, they have to take a look at what the advisory committee is going to do. And it gives the neighborhood a stronger voice in area of development. And there are a couple of lots in the boundary map that you've seen that could be developed more densely than they are. So this is really a tool actually for the planning board and for the neighborhood. It's not, I know there's concerns about how regulatory it is, but it's more for an advisory, stronger advisory group to the planning board, zoning board, not the HDC, because this isn't in a historic district, to help them keep the neighborhood whole, while, if changing, keeps the neighborhood feel. The zoning ordinance has rules about building heights and all sorts of things that can affect how a lot in this neighborhood, perhaps adversely, by being 35 feet or 50 feet, depending on which side of the street you're on or which zone you're in. And the planning board will have this tool, this advisory committee, who they can turn to and say, what do you think? Is this appropriate? The zoning board can do that too. And that, I think, actually is the more important board. But the state has decided that going through the planning board is the tool or the route that these decisions would be made. And I probably talked around in a big circle, but I hope I answered your question. In the end, it's the people that drive this and advise the planning board. The planning board can and the zoning board can overreach this, but at least this area of town will have put their foot down and given their opinion, and in a concentrated group that takes a lot of work if you don't make one of these neighborhoods. You can have representatives that strongly represent a whole area of town, as opposed to 3 people who are upset about a particular project trying to gather up some folks on an individual project. So it's a what's the note? What's the word? Advocacy group, I guess, would be a good word.
That's a great answer. The last thing I'll say is you did clarify a point I wasn't even really aware that I missed, and this may help when you put this together, the difference between the things that might, or the plans that would come before just staff. But I don't mean that derogatorily. I mean the things that don't make it a planning board, that this group would be advisory to those things as well. That's a pretty good point. I mean, if I'm understanding it correctly, you described that very well, Julie. That's a good subtlety, because there's a lot of things that go on that would never make it to planning board. So that's a very good point, and I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
I'm glad I could make that clarification. Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you, Ann. Dan, do we have a...
Yep. Next, we have Ann Kenny.
Ann?
I think you're still muted.
Am I unmuted now?
Now we can hear you.
You can hear me now. Okay. I'm a resident in this neighborhood at 3 Walnut Street. And I just wanted to point out a few things after listening to this tonight, which I appreciate you all bringing this to our attention, actually. I wanted to say that, number one, you pointed out that this neighborhood is a community, which it really is. Everybody here helps everybody else. The older, the younger, the middle-aged. And it's affordable. The people living here are teachers, they're artists, they're employees of Exeter. It's a rich cultural community of not necessarily wealthy people, but people that are part of your culture and your community. So that being said, I like the idea that it's something you want to preserve. Secondly, there is a spot in town, and this is why I joined you tonight, because I am concerned, where a building was demolished and a totally new footprint was put in place, not in the original footprint, and also seems considerably larger. I don't know if it's going to be a rental or a few rental properties or a house or what. And, these things kind of stand out because as a community, we're wondering what the building future is going to be like in our neighborhood. And given COVID, there's many people that want to live in Exeter, tear down a house and build a, $500,000, $1 million house, whatever. And so I appreciate that you want to keep the community feel here, as well as some of these houses are very historic. I'm not saying people shouldn't be allowed to have additions or this and that, but there is something to recognize that as people want to come and develop in Exeter, that they don't take the character and the culture out of our community. That being said, of course, I would like to volunteer, and I just heard Anne previously mention this, and my first thought was, how open is this planning board? I haven't investigated the planning board members. I'm hoping they're not all developers just looking to, make a buck. But I am hoping that the planning board would be a board that is open to an advisory group, not that you would be wasting your time, but that certainly they're interested in maintaining the rich area that Exeter is known for. And that's why everybody wants to come here. And it doesn't mean, suburban neighborhoods. It doesn't mean building a new development and having hundreds of cars start driving through your neighborhood. There's a certain quality of life that I think we all need to be responsible for. And those of us that live here want to maintain that quality of life. That's why we moved here. And that's an economic discussion, like quality of life versus money, and developing and, new neighborhoods and that are not in keeping with the kind of rich diversity and, like you said before, almost a more modest community, and which brings its advantages to Exeter. So that's all I have to say. I think I'd like to volunteer. I don't want to waste time if, everybody's going to just throw it away when we're done working on it. But I certainly would like to stay in touch, and I live here, and I always wanted to live here. And this neighborhood is, I can't tell you how community oriented it is. We take care of our elderly population. We take care of people's driveways getting snowplowed. Like, it is, you can't buy this. You cannot buy it.
Thanks, Anne. That's a pretty ringing endorsement of the neighborhood.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to add into that. First, you live on one of the oldest streets in town, but it shows that I don't know why it was laid out in the 1600s, but it was in that M shape that it is. But it really wasn't built up until the 1840s, so it's really very interesting, and I haven't found out why yet. But first I want to defend the planning board a little bit, that they are not a group of developers, and they're regular folks that want to do the same thing we're doing here, but they have a whole different aspect of projects that they look at rather than what we're looking at here. But being an advisory committee will help the Heritage Commission teach or give knowledge to the planning board when they see this, that they can use when considering new developments elsewhere. The planning board has the authority to regulate or look at the actual architectural styles of what's being presented to them. But I think with a little bit more advocacy from a larger group of people in town, might assist that or enforce that, I guess. What we want, what is special about Exeter, and we don't want the McMansions or the ticky-tacky houses going into, where they're right out front. I'm being snobby here about that, I suppose, but I don't mean to offend anyone, but this is something that will be a good tool, not just for the citizens, but for the volunteers that you rely on to help preserve or grow the town, whichever way it needs to go.
Yeah,
and if I could speak for the planning board, we certainly will give the advisory committee an open forum. We will, give you all the time you need at a meeting. We often spend, multiple meetings going over plans, presentations, listening to engineers and lawyers. Sometimes, one project can be, 30 or 40 hours worth of our time if it's a big enough project. So we're willing to do that. And we certainly I think this is something that's really worth doing. And I will, as a planning board rep to the Heritage Commission, I'm going to make sure that, you're given a chance to spend time with the planning board going over everything that you come up with.
Well, thank you. And thank you for involving the neighborhood. Of course, you need to hear from the people that actually live in the neighborhood. So is anyone else, this might be after the meeting, but is anyone else tonight listening to this? Or do I know anyone that's already part of a group? Or how would I go further in being involved in such an advisory group?
Your name on a list.
Okay.
I'm gonna make note of anybody tonight who says that they're interested in being involved. I'm not sure if I have your contact info, but I think there's one last slide. Actually, Dan, could you show the final slide? Because I think that's got John's email address on it.
It does.
Yeah. So if you are interested, and this applies to anybody who's on the call or watching on TV, I think probably the best thing to do would be to email John Merkel, who's the chair, and let him know. And then we can kind of start going from there.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann.
Next up, we have Joel Shander. It is saying, Zoom is saying that he is unable to talk because of the version of Zoom he has. I'm going to have to promote him to panelist, so it may be a moment.
And I think that might be true of some other folks too. So I think just for anybody else who's on the call, if it's saying that you're not able to speak, put your hand up anyway, and it sounds like Dan can promote you to a panelist while you ask your question.
Yep, he should be able to speak now.
Do you hear me?
Joel, I heard you for a second. It wasn't very loud.
Oh, okay. All right. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Hi. Good evening. I'm Joel Shander. I live at 93 Park Street. I am speaking on behalf of the trustees of 93 Park Street. So we appreciate the fact that this meeting is being held. We appreciate that some efforts have been made kind of to respond to questions that were raised at the first forum 4 months ago. At least one of us has attended that first forum, all the intervening public meetings of the Heritage Commission. We've read the state guidebook on neighborhood heritage areas, and we've read the fact that was written in preparation for tonight. And based on all of that, we completely oppose this creation of this FHA, and we strongly encourage our neighbors to reject this proposal as well. And instead of moving it into, quote, next phase. We want to be clear that we have no reason to doubt the good intentions of the commission as a whole, although the record is pretty clear that some people advocate to seek historic area light control on the property owners in this neighborhood. And it is our hope that the 93 Park Street property, which has stood for 125 years and was adapted for use in both the 19th and 20th centuries, will stand for another 125 years and be adapted for the 21st and 22nd centuries. But good intentions aren't enough. The Heritage Commission needs to be clear about what its objectives are, and it needs to be clear about how this proposal is narrowly tailored to achieve those objectives. I think as it stands, what the Commission says it wants and what the FAQ implies that was prepared for tonight is that you basically want a blank check for the town's planning commission, not the neighborhood, to appoint its own advisory committee, the committee that will establish both a set of to be determined after the fact regulations, quote, and that's the quote, regulations to impose on the neighborhood as well as the neighborhood's boundaries. This makes no sense. It's undemocratic, it's unrepresentative, it's coercive and not cooperative, and it pretends that property rights don't exist. And furthermore, incomprehensively, the fact says simultaneously that the planning commission can, quote, approve regulations to provide protections that the fact itself says that the town boards and committees and even state law do not allow the town to impose. Exeter's most cherished historical artifact is the draft of the U.S. Constitution, and that's the thing that the delegates debated day in and day out for months and rejected. But the Heritage Commission wants everyone to sign their names to a blank ream of paper and let a government committee write the rules later. No thanks. 93 Park Street opts out, and we recommend our neighbors do the same. I will add, based on tonight's presentation, that I think we would be delighted to join any community forum that allows us to have input into the path going forward. Finally, we didn't select this neighborhood to raise a family because of the architecture or the age of the buildings. It's the location, it's the people that make it worth living in. We do have a number of questions for the Heritage Commission, and I think in the interest of time, we'll just ask them all up front and hope to maybe get answers to some of them. Several of them were asked back in October, but before there's kind of a next public input, we would like to see answers to these. And I'll tell you up front, there are 10 of them, but I'll kind of go through them quickly. First, who did the notification for tonight's meeting get mailed to? Was it just the property owners in that 2019 historic area study? And did any of the homes that I think we would say are in the neighborhood that are not included in that study because they weren't, quote, historic, did they get notified of this meeting? Number two, at the October forum, the presentation said that this NHA decision would go to the town for a townwide vote. The FAQ prepared for tonight says that neither the neighborhood nor the town are involved. And I'd say the presentation tonight is actually like what's on the slides is contradicting what people are saying. So I'd just like to really understand what the actual process is kind of from a legal perspective. Three, can property owners indeed opt out of this NHA? It's listed as a question on the FAQ. It's on the slide tonight, but the question wasn't answered. And it just says that you can never opt out after the boundaries are established. Four, what's the process to dissolve an NHA? Can the neighborhood do it by a petition? Does the Planning Commission do it? The Heritage Commission? Does it have to go to the town? Number five, does the town and or state law require that NHA advisory committees meetings be held as public meetings? Because they certainly sound like a town, like a political entity. Number six, during the previous forum in October, someone asked whether the real purpose, quote, real purpose of the NHA was to kind of magically grant the zoning board or planning commission the ability to say no to property owners' requests that the town couldn't otherwise say no to. And the answer that was given at the time was yes. And my question tonight, is that still the Heritage Commission's position? Number seven, in order to avoid legal challenges, it seems that any town decisions related to the NHA will have to be equitably applied based on defined and consistent criteria. But if the commission's process happens as described in the FAQ, which I think varies a little bit from what was presented tonight, the advisory committee will be stood up before the criteria exist. So do the regulations that it's going to establish only go into effect after they create them? Or will homeowners be stuck not able to make any changes in the meantime? And what's that time period like? Number eight, if the purpose of an NHA is a truly neighborhood-specific heritage, then why isn't the entirety of that permanent NHA advisory committee required to be made up of neighborhood members like a homeowners association? I'll leave that as it is. Number 9, why is that advisory committee appointed by the town rather than elected by the neighborhood it is supposed to represent? And finally, 10, what additional boards, committees, et cetera, will homeowners have to go through or to in order to get to the zoning board or other town agendas where currently they can just go directly there today? And do you have any estimate of what time and expense will basically be imposed on property owners in order to do that? Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
Joel, if you could send your questions to John so we can get you comprehensive answers.
I think we can try to cover as much of that as possible, but there's probably some of those questions that we will need to try to answer after talking to one another. I will start. In terms of who got the mailings, my understanding is that it was every property that was part of that original survey project. So no, it didn't include folks outside the boundaries. Hopefully that answers that question. In terms of the opt-out question, that there is that opportunity. So let's say the neighborhood advisory committee has been established and they're talking about what the boundaries are. That would be the time when a property owner could say, if they're at the edge of the property, presumably, no, we don't want this property to be involved. And then the advisory committee would take that into consideration. So there is an opt-out option. From what I understand of how the Division of Historical Resources has this set up, that would probably work for something on the outer boundary, but not work so well for a property right in the middle. So the Neighborhood Advisory Committee would probably be less likely to say yes to an opt-out from someone right in the middle. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's see.
There are a couple of good questions about the, not that they weren't all good questions, but the ones that that I wanted to talk to is about the public meetings, whether this advisory group would have public meetings. And yes, as an advisory group to another formal land use board, they would be public meetings with minutes and posting notices of meeting times and places. So that those would be on our website, and at the library, I think, is one of the places that we leave them. So that gives everybody an opportunity, whether you want to join the advisory committee or not. The process of disbanding was one that I frankly never thought about, and it would really just be a reverse of the process of getting it created by the planning board, or it could be a citizen's petition. And then
I think one of the questions also around why wouldn't the advisory committee be all neighborhood members? I think ideally it would be. The only reason it wouldn't be would be if there weren't enough people from within the neighborhood who were interested in being on the advisory committee. But considering that it only needs to be 3 people, it doesn't seem like that would be a problem. So this is a structure that was created by the state of New Hampshire to allow towns and municipalities to provide additional protections to areas of their town. So it's a relatively new concept, and it's something that I think is still being worked on. I guess I feel like the intention is not to say to people, no, you can't do this to your house. And obviously intentions are what they are, but the intention is to preserve the feel of a neighborhood. A neighborhood that the people who live in feel is pretty special, and that is certainly a real indicator of how this town has grown over the centuries. And I think it would be unfortunate if we were to lose too much more of what this neighborhood has to offer. I know that towns grow and change over the years, and we have lost a number of neighborhoods in this town that we were not able to protect in time, like the Franklin Street neighborhood. And I think that, one of the things that is appealing about living in Exeter is the fact that it is such a historic place, and that it is such a distinctive place to live. And I think that that's worth protecting.
Again, please forward the questions to me, Joel, if you're still listening there. But I would prefer, if we have more, Dan, that we move on.
I'd just like to say one more thing about the resources that are available. I know on our website, we do have a connection to the Division of Historical Resources Manual for Heritage Neighborhoods. And that, when you look at that, it does seem really restrictive. They go way into minutia, I will say. But the role of the advisory committee is to look at that and take out what is best for the area that is of interest to you. So it's, I want to stress that we're not adding a new historic district to a town. We're adding a conversation area, if that's a theory to grasp, but it's and not conservation, conversation. Where everybody with a similar interest of why they're there. Is it because it's close to town? Is it because of the small feel? Is it because they like the particular style of the house they bought? Everybody's going to have a different level of interest. And the point about who's on the committee and why would somebody outside of the neighborhood want to be involved are the same reasons that somebody in the neighborhood would want to be involved. And I hear it all the time as a select person that new people come in because they like the feel of an area like the Park Street neighborhood area. They like the intimacy. So people from outside the neighborhood have an interest in keeping that small town feel that attracts new property owners who are adding to our property base, basically, our tax base. May not be as well spoken as I want it to be, but that's why I would recognize that. And there might be people with different professions that can advise the whole committee plus the planning board on during that making up the advisory. Not manual. What are we calling it?
Guidelines.
Guidelines. Thank you. So input from different sources never hurts. Okay.
Thank you, Julie. Dan?
Yep. Next up is Fran Berman.
Hello, I'm Fran Berman. I live at 12 Locust Avenue. I've been here for 35 years. It's an awesome neighborhood. And my question is, as you're talking about how issues will arise that might not come before the planning board normally, how would they get triggered to go before the advisory board? What would be how would anyone become aware that something was about to happen that would get the advisory board engaged?
That's a good question, and I would propose that it would come through the planning and building department when a permit is being requested. That much like with a historic district or a conservation area, that the staff have to inform the various boards of what is being proposed. And I think that as an advisory committee to the planning board, everything has to shuffle through the administrative personnel in all those cases. So we just talked about something on a project, and sorry to say, I have to say Historic District Commission, but to flag basically people that come in for the smallest little building permit change that the planning department has any regulation over, they flag it and say maybe this needs to be looked at by a different group or something like that. So that would be my proposal, but that's just me talking. That I think that would be the most efficient way for people to find out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Fran. Dan?
Next up, we have Jackie Rocco.
Yes, hi. I live at 31 Park Street, so I'm right at the edge of this on the other side of the bridge from most of you. I similarly have a list of about 8 questions, and I'm not going to go through them all because I think all of us probably have a life that we'd like to enjoy this evening, and I will just send them to Mr. Merkel. I love the neighborhood, but I don't want any more regulation, quite frankly. I don't know how you can define the overall feel of a neighborhood that has housing that spans 4 centuries of construction. My house alone has parts that were built before 1802, in the mid-1800s, and in the year 2000. So I don't know what criteria you would possibly use to make any sort of judgments on my house. I think that everyone who's interested in this should read the Heritage Commission handbook that's available on the state site. It's considerably less touchy-feely than the conversation tonight. It talks about ensuring that the outside of the properties are retained in their present form, whatever that present form is. And this includes things like fences, getting trees cut down, and other things. So we're being asked to sign up for undefined regulations. I mean, this advisory commission does not have any rules. So we're being asked to say, yeah, I'd love to be advised by people who have yet to make up the rules. And I think that that's the biggest problem that I see with this whole thing overall. I don't know if anyone's thought about how much work it's going to be for the Planning Commission to take on looking at 200 additional houses and any changes that they might want to make. I don't understand what sort of enforcement powers the advisory committee is going to have because of this, or if there's additional legal implications for the planning board if they make a decision that one of the homeowners doesn't like. I'd want to know if the advisory committee members are going to recuse themselves from a project if it's right next door to them. Mostly I see a lot of opportunities for neighbors to get on each other's cases. I understand the spirit of this thing, that people want things to stay the same. I've lived here since 1983, and mostly what I've seen in the neighborhood is it's just gotten better. So I'm sort of less afraid of change than I guess many people here. That's all I have to say. I don't really, I'd like to submit my questions and have them answered maybe at the next meeting.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Jackie.
And Ann Kenny has her hand raised again.
Sorry, I'm unmuted now, I think.
Yes.
Just a couple little follow-ups after listening to everything is, I just want to say I did move to this neighborhood to raise my children, to have them go to school here, to be close to the school. So I didn't move here as an older person or developer or anything like that. So The other thing is the idea that someone brought up about electing representatives for our neighborhood. I would just say I'm not in favor of that at all. I want all the input of the neighborhood, and getting into a political election of who represent us is not a good idea. And so I appreciate the discussions tonight, and I think we all feel we have a very special neighborhood. But I would also say that the planning board and in general, maybe part of the Heritage Commission is, there's an economic view of neighborhoods and development and quality of life. And sometimes that gets lost in discussions. And it's valuable. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Just last little points.
I think one thing that I would like to speak to, please put these, keep your questions going to John. But one of the things that I wanted to kind of stress was that there actually will end up being two committees or the Heritage Commission with neighborhood folks who want to have input either way. And then after they present to the planning board, that's when the official area committee will start up with the maintenance of whatever actions are in the guidelines. The question about what happens between now and when the planning board adopts the heritage area. Well, no rules change. Nothing stops today because we're talking to you about this. And how strict or how not strict, or maybe there won't be anything. That's what this group is going to get together to talk about, and look at the state guidelines and say, well, those ones are too harsh. We don't want to go that far down the road. Is it going to be like a condo or housing association? That's up to whatever committee wants to, is formed and want to recommend. So that's why I would recommend that you join us on the Heritage Committee as we process through this.
Okay. Dan?
There are currently no hands raised. Oh, there is now one hand up. This is Vicky Geis.
Hi, this is not Vicky Geis, I'm sorry. It's Carol Waters, and I was using Vicky's Zoom earlier, and I guess I'm still logged in as her. So sorry about that. I live on 15 Oak Street, and I've lived on this in this neighborhood since 1973, and I've seen a lot of changes, and all for the better. I think there's more community now than ever. I wasn't sure about what the Heritage Commission was, and I think you've made that all clear, trying to explain versus, Historic District and Heritage Commission. I didn't read the material on the state. I'm not really well prepared, but I've learned a lot tonight. I'm not sure if I would be able to serve on a committee of some sort. I'm just not sure if I'm pro or con about this. So I think I'm open to listen and decide, but I'm not sure if that's what you need as the Exeter Heritage Commission. It's somebody who doesn't know where they stand right now. I think all the people that have spoken tonight, I hear their passion. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you, Carol.
I think your input would be very valuable, even if you don't know exactly how you feel about it right now. I think anybody who's interested in continuing this conversation is welcome. So I think it would be great.
I agree.
We do have another hand up. That is Ben Payor. Is also on an older version of Zoom, so he will be promoted to panelist in just a moment.
John, I hate to say this, but I have to leave. So sorry. Great display, guys, and tell me when the next meeting's going to be. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie.
Good night.
Good night.
All right.
Hi, this is actually Abby Pear. I'm on my husband's Zoom. I live at 8 Salem Street. And I think we've all heard a lot tonight that's been very informative, but I wanted to circle back to the questions from, I'm so sorry I don't have the names, but Joel at 93 Park Street and the woman from Locust Street. It seems like they had a lot of questions that would just give us more information on kind of what you guys have planned. And I know that they were asked to submit their questions to John. Is there any way that those questions could be available in some sort of public forum that we could all kind of access the answers to, so we all have that information? Is that a possibility in any way?
Yeah, I wonder, John, once you've received some questions and we can maybe type up some answers, is that something we could post on our website so that people can reference it there? Would that be the easiest way?
Yeah, if I think Exeter TV has been very good at being able to accommodate us. I think that what we will probably need to do is meet one more formal time to generate the answers to these questions, and then at that point, let's post them, and they'll be accessible.
We could always have another meeting like this in which we restate the questions and then give our opinion a little bit, or and maybe people would then discuss them more. But I think it'd be good to post them too.
Yeah, I think that would be good to do both. But we do have on the Heritage Commission's website, there's a link kind of down near the bottom that says the Park Street Neighborhood Area Project. And if you click on that, all the materials that we've collected so far are there. So we can certainly post a link to a document that has the questions we've received and the answers we've come up with.
You still with us, Abby?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Dan?
Yep, there are at the moment no more hands raised.
Okay, with that being said, Commission board members, do you have any other comments that you'd like to make before we sign out? What I will do, I will take the questions and I will probably distribute them to you individually, and you will have be asked to take time to contemplate them. But I do think we're going to need to meet publicly to formulate our responses. But
we do that at our next scheduled meeting, John?
Yes. Yeah. And there will probably be maybe some individual exchanges before that time, but I think we should prepare our answers at that public forum.
Okay. For the folks who are listening, when is our next meeting scheduled? Just as a reminder, if people want to attend by Zoom, they can certainly do that. I want to make sure I have it in my calendar too.
Our next meeting would be March 16th.
16th. Great.
At 12:30.
At
Yes.
12:30. Okay. Is there any other business or discussion?
Nothing else from me.
Okay, it's going on almost 8:00, and that's when we plan to end the meeting anyway. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah, second John's motion.
Okay, we need to go. John, your vote.
Aye.
Maura,
Aye.
Bill,
Aye.
and I'll go aye. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good, John. Good.
Thanks, John.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks a lot.
Thank you.